In the summer of 1683, the largest army ever assembled in Europe was marching west. Its destination was Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire, and beyond it, the gateway to the rest of Europe. Vienna had held once before, in 1529. What happened outside the walls of Vienna on the 12th of September would determine the fate of Europe for centuries to come. To understand why the Ottomans were marching on Vienna, we need to understand what the Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power. From its heartland in Anatolia, it had spread west into the Balkans, absorbing Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece and Albania. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II had taken Constantinople itself, the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire, the greatest Christian city in the East, and made it the new center of Ottoman power. From there, the empire had continued to expand, southward into Egypt and the Levant, eastward into Persia, westward along the coast of North Africa. At its greatest extent, the Ottoman Empire stretched from the shores of Morocco to the borders of Iran. It was one of the most sophisticated and powerful political entities on Earth, and it had long had its eye on the West. The great obstacle to further expansion into Europe was the Habsburg Empire, the sprawling dynastic state centered on Vienna that controlled Austria, Bohemia, much of the German lands, and the western portion of Hungary. For more than a century, the two empires had fought over Central Europe, and Hungary had become the bloody, contested ground between them. The Ottomans held the east, the Habsburgs held the west, and between them the Hungarian plain had seen generation after generation of war. By the late 17th century, the man who wanted to change all of this was Kara Mustafa Pasha, Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, and in practice, the man who ran it, and convinced that the moment had come to push decisively west. The Habsburg Emperor Leopold I was distracted by conflict with Louis XIV of France in the west. Hungary's nobility was in open revolt against Vienna. The empire was stretched and fractured. If Vienna was ever going to fall, this was the time. The force that marched out of Adrianople in the spring of 1683 numbered somewhere between 140,000 and 200,000 men. It was the largest Ottoman army ever sent into Europe. Janissary infantry, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar horsemen, Wallachian and Moldavian auxiliaries, and a vast train of siege equipment that included some of the heaviest artillery in the world. They moved west through the Balkans and into Hungary largely unopposed. The Habsburg frontier forces were too scattered and too few to mount any meaningful resistance. Town after town either surrendered or was bypassed as the Great Column rolled west along the Danube corridor. Emperor Leopold did not wait to see what would happen. On the 7th of July, with the Ottoman vanguard already approaching Austrian territory, he fled Vienna with his court, heading west toward the safety of Passau. It was not a moment that history would remember with warmth. The Ottoman advance guard reached the outskirts of Vienna on the 14th of July. The city that greeted them had been stripped of most of its civilian population, who had fled west in the weeks before. What remained was a garrison of around 15,000 soldiers and militia, under the command of Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, an experienced and determined commander who had been left with the task of holding the city until relief could arrive. Starhemberg knew what was coming. He had perhaps weeks, he began organizing his defenses. Kara Mustafa, for his part, chose not to assault Vienna directly. His plan was siege, to dig approach trenches toward the walls, to place mines beneath the great bastions, and to methodically reduce the city's defenses until it had no choice but to surrender. It was a proven method, but it required something he may have underestimated: time. The siege of Vienna began in earnest on the 25th of July. Ottoman engineers pushed forward approach trenches from their main camp to the south of the city, working their way toward the outer walls under covering fire. Mines were tunneled beneath the great bastions, the projecting fortifications that were the key to the city's defense. When they detonated, sections of masonry collapsed, and Ottoman infantry rushed the breaches. Each time a breach was opened, Starhemberg's garrison scrambled to close it. Timber, earth, rubble, anything that could fill a gap. The fighting in the breaches was desperate and close, fought with musket and sword in the dust and smoke of collapsed fortifications. Disease spread through the cramped streets behind the walls. Casualties mounted daily. By late August, the outer defences had been largely lost. Ottoman trenches now reached the inner walls. The great Berg bastion, the most critical point in the entire fortification, was under direct assault. Starhemberg sent message after message to the relief force he knew must be gathering somewhere to the west. But the messages were slow, and the Ottomans were getting closer. What Starhemberg did not yet know was that the relief was indeed coming. Under the command of Polish King Jan III, Sobieski, the Holy League, a coalition hastily assembled by Pope Innocent XI, bringing together the forces of Poland, the Holy Roman Empire, and several German states, had been gathering at Tulln, on the Danube northwest of Vienna. By early September, they were ready to move. On the night of the 11th of September, signal fires blazed on the ridge of Kahlenberg, the high ground that looked down over Vienna and the plain below. Starhemberg, watching from the shattered walls of the city, saw them. The relief army had arrived. Vienna had perhaps 2 or 3 days left. The relief force had assembled on the ridge through that day and into the night. Polish cavalry on the right, Imperial and Allied German forces in the centre and on the left. Sobieski held overall command. The army he led numbered around 70,000 men, drawn from across Catholic Europe, united by the Pope's call, and the genuine fear of what an Ottoman Vienna would mean for the continent. Kara Mustafa, informed of the relief army's approach, made the decision that would define his reputation. Rather than lifting the siege and turning his full strength against the relief army before it could deploy into battle formation, which was the textbook response, he divided his forces. He kept the majority of his troops in the siege lines around Vienna, and sent a portion to hold the ridge against the relief army's descent. He believed, it seems, that he was close enough to taking Vienna that he could manage both threats simultaneously. He was wrong. The battle began on the morning of the 12th of September, 1683. The 3 columns of the relief force began their descent from Kahlenberg into the wooded ravines and slopes below. The terrain was difficult: broken ground, dense woodland, and steep gradients that fractured formations and made coordination nearly impossible. Fighting was intense through the morning and into the afternoon, as the Ottoman forces defending the high ground gave ground slowly under the weight of the Allied advance. By mid-afternoon, the Holy League forces had cleared the ridge and were deploying onto the plain below. The Ottoman army was now caught in a deteriorating position. the relief force pressing from the north, and the Vienna garrison, sensing the moment, beginning to sally from the city's gates to the east. It was at this point that Jan Sobieski unleashed his cavalry. What followed was the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. Approximately 18,000 horsemen descended from the ridge in a single sweeping charge that struck the Ottoman centre with devastating force. The Ottoman line broke. Within hours, the most disciplined and feared army in the world was in full retreat. The Ottomans abandoned their siege lines, their tents, their artillery, everything. Kara Mustafa fled east with whatever forces he could gather. The reckoning came swiftly. Kara Mustafa retreated east with the remnants of his army, reaching Belgrade by December. There, on Christmas Day, 1683, he was met by messengers from Sultan Mehmed IV, carrying a silk cord. It was the traditional Ottoman signal of execution. Kara Mustafa knelt toward Mecca, recited his prayers, and was strangled. He was 54 years old, the man who had brought the largest army in the world to the walls of Vienna, had paid for its failure with his life. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat at Vienna was not immediately recognized as the turning point it would become. The empire was still vast, still powerful, and it would continue to fight. But it would never again seriously threaten Western Europe. In the years that followed, the Holy League pressed east. Buda, the old Hungarian capital, was recaptured in 1686. By 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz had driven the Ottomans out of Hungary entirely, redrawing the map of Central Europe in ways that would last for centuries. Jan Sobieski returned to Poland a celebrated hero. The charge that had broken the Ottoman line on that September afternoon would be spoken of for generations.